Elias Drake stood in the crystalline expanse of the Galactic Council chamber, the cold gleam of alien starlight fracturing through the towering dome above. The chamber was a study in calculated grandeur, walls pulsing faintly with bioluminescent symbols of power, the air thick with the ozone tang of advanced filtration systems, and the subtle hum of energy fields vibrating beneath the marble-like floors. Elias adjusted his stance, his boots grinding softly against the alien stone, as the eyes of 100 species bore down on him. At the center of the chamber, High Counselor Veltarax loomed on her elevated dais, her 7 violet arms splayed in what might have been regality or condescension. Her voice, smooth and resonant, echoed like the toll of an ancient bell. "Earth," she intoned, her crystalline eyes narrowing, "has shown itself to be reckless. Your technological advances, while impressive, are dangerous. Your species lacks the wisdom to wield the power it has cultivated." Elias's jaw tightened. He forced his hands to remain at his sides, though the urge to clench them into fists was almost overwhelming. The High Counselor's words dripped with finality, but it was the sneer beneath them that burned. He glanced at the delegation seated behind him, diplomats, scientists, and military minds. Their faces were impassive, masks of professionalism, but their tension rippled through the air like a distant thunderstorm. "High Counselor," Elias began, his voice low and steady, but carrying an edge sharp enough to draw blood, "you speak of wisdom, yet dismiss innovation. Earth's advancements, our achievements, could benefit this council in ways you refuse to imagine." Veltarax waved a shimmering appendage, dismissing his words like smoke. "Imagination is not our failing, Ambassador Drake. Restraint is your species' failing. And that is why, by unanimous decision, the Council rejects Earth's petition for full membership." The silence that followed was a black hole, swallowing every hope that had clung to this moment. Elias inhaled sharply, the scent of metallic air filling his lungs, but it did nothing to quell the molten rage simmering within him. His throat tightened as he stepped forward, standing tall against the looming figure of the High Counselor. "You're making a mistake," he said, his voice quieter now, but heavier, laden with the gravity of a storm yet to break. "Earth has no intention of being restrained by outdated politics and fear." The counselor stirred. There were murmurs from the edges of the chamber, alien languages like hissing steam and resonant chimes brushing against his ears. Veltarax's skin deepened in shade, the crystalline edges glinting like a jagged blade. "Careful, Ambassador," she said, her voice dangerously low. "Defiance will be met with consequences. The Council will not tolerate insubordination." Elias let the silence stretch, his eyes scanning the assembly of alien dignitaries. Some looked away, their discomfort evident, while others met his gaze with varying degrees of disdain. Only one figure, a scaled creature with fiery orange eyes, held his stare, a flicker of something akin to respect in its expression. Elias filed the moment away, storing it like a weapon to be drawn later. "Earth has heard the Council's judgment," Elias finally said, his tone measured. "But know this, rejection is not defeat. It's merely the opening of another path." He turned sharply on his heel, the sound of his boots striking the floor reverberating through the chamber like the toll of a war drum. The delegation rose behind him, their movements synchronized, disciplined. They followed him out without a word, leaving the council chamber in their wake. The heavy doors slid shut with a whisper of finality, sealing Earth's future behind them. The air on the starship Resolute was taut with tension, its recycled sterility doing little to dispel the weight of the moment. Elias stood in the observation deck, the vast sprawl of space a silent witness to his fury. His reflection stared back at him from the glass. Hardened green eyes set beneath a furrowed brow, short black hair streaked with silver at the temples, and the rigid line of his jaw betraying the storm within. Behind him, the hiss of the doors opening announced Admiral Arlen Voss. The older man's presence was as steady as a rock in turbulent waters, his uniform sharp, his silvered beard lending him an air of wisdom hard-earned through battles fought and victories seized. "They've made their move," Voss said, his voice a low rumble like the growl of a predator waiting to strike. Now we make ours. Elias turned, his hands clasped behind his back. They think they've boxed us in. That rejection will break us. They don't understand us, Voss replied, stepping forward. His boots echoed softly against the polished floor. They've underestimated humanity's ability to adapt, to build, to survive. The words struck a chord in Elias. He nodded slowly, his gaze returning to the stars. The Council's grip extends far, but it isn't unbreakable. We'll start where their influence is weakest. The Outer Rim, Voss confirmed. The Tarkai, the Alvan Syndicates, maybe even the Kaltrax Confederation. Fringe worlds with little loyalty to the Council. They'll listen, especially if we offer something better. Elias's mind raced, the gears of strategy turning with sharp precision. We'll need more than promises. We'll need infrastructure, trade routes, something tangible to pull them into the fold. Voss's expression darkened. Dr. Lin Shun has been working on something. A communication network that bypasses the Council system entirely. Faster, more secure. She calls it the quantum relay. Elias turned sharply. And it's operational? Not yet, but she says it could be ready within months. Then we start now, Elias said, his voice firm, unyielding. We'll lay the groundwork while the Council congratulates itself on its short-sightedness. When we move, they won't see it coming. Voss's lips curled into a faint smile, a hint of approval in his weathered eyes. You always were a gambling man, Drake. Let's hope this one pays off. Elias turned fully, his hand gripping Voss's shoulder briefly. It will, Admiral, because this isn't a gamble. It's a promise. In the subterranean depths of Earth's military headquarters, the air was electric with urgency. Tactical screens flickered with streams of data, holographic projections casting a blue glow across the room. Dr. Lin Shun stood at the center of the chaos, her slight frame dwarfed by the towering displays. Her voice, sharp and precise, cut through the din. The quantum relay is the cornerstone of our plan, she explained, her almond-shaped eyes glinting with determination. It'll allow us to establish trade routes, coordinate fleets, and bypass the Council's stranglehold on communication. Elias stepped closer, the faint scent of coolant and metal tingling in his nose. How vulnerable is it? Very, Lynn admitted, her voice dropping slightly. At least until we have enough nodes to create redundancy. For now, if the Council targets one, the entire network collapses. Voss frowned, his arms crossing over his broad chest. Then we'll protect it. Layered defenses, decoy installations, let them chase shadows while we secure the real thing. Elias nodded, his mind already racing ahead. We'll divide our efforts. Voss, you'll handle the Outer Rim operations. I'll take charge of the diplomatic outreach, and Lynn, get that relay operational, whatever it takes. As the team dispersed, Elias lingered by the glowing map of the galaxy. His fingers brushed the edges of the hologram, tracing the territories the Council sought to confine them to. A faint smile tugged at his lips, though it held no humor, only resolve. They thought they could banish us to the edges, he murmured, the words barely audible over the hum of the room. They've only given us the space to grow. The holographic map of the galaxy shimmered before Elias Drake, casting a pale blue glow over his face as he stood alone in the darkened war room. The vast expanse of Council-controlled space loomed like a shadow over the scattered dim points of light that marked the Outer Rim colonies. A faint hum emanated from the projectors, a whisper of power beneath the surface, much like the resolve tightening in his chest. This map, Elias thought, would one day tell a different story. A story not of dominance, but of resilience. He traced his finger over the nearest colony, the cool light tingling against his skin. Out there, on the edge of everything, humanity's rebellion would ignite. The door hissed open and Admiral Voss entered, his broad shoulders blocking the sterile light of the corridor. He carried the scent of the starship docks, oil, heated steel, and ozone from energy cores, a reminder of the fleet waiting to be unleashed. They're ready, Voss said, his voice low, gravelly, as if the weight of years carried in every syllable. The first relay deployment team leaves at dawn. Elias turned to him, his green eyes glinting with determination. And the decoys? Positioned. The Council will see what we want them to see. Voss paused, his lips pressing into a thin line. But it's a risk, Elias. A single misstep, and they'll sweep through the outer rim before we can establish the network. Elias tilted his head, the faintest trace of a smile curving his mouth. A risk we'll take. They underestimate us, Arlen. That's their weakness. Voss's laugh was rough, like gravel grinding underfoot. You're betting everything on that. Elias nodded, his voice quiet but unyielding. Because it's the truth. Hours later, the Resolute hung in the void of space, its hull gleaming like obsidian beneath the soft glow of a nearby nebula. Elias stood on the bridge, the hum of the ship's systems a steady undercurrent. Outside the viewing window, the quantum relay station floated, skeletal scaffolding bristling with nodes and emitters. Technicians in sleek exosuits darted between the structure and the docking bay, their movements precise, almost dance-like in the zero-gravity environment. Dr. Lin Xun appeared at Elias's side, the faint scent of antiseptic clinging to her lab coat. Her eyes, sharp and focused, were fixed on the relay. "It's beautiful," she murmured, her voice carrying both pride and trepidation. "But fragile. Until the network stabilizes, one strike is all it would take." Elias studied her, noting the tension in her posture, the way her fingers twitched as if ready to solve problems that hadn't yet arisen. "You've done more than anyone thought possible, Lin. This is the foundation of everything." She turned to him, her expression softening for a moment. "Do you ever stop to think about what happens if this fails?" Elias's gaze shifted back to the relay, its blue lights pulsing like a heartbeat. "Failure isn't an option. Not because it's unthinkable, but because if we hesitate, if we doubt, then the Council wins without firing a shot." Lin nodded slowly, her eyes lingering on him, searching for something unspoken. "Then let's make sure it doesn't fail." In the weeks that followed, the relay deployments became a symphony of precision and subterfuge. Tarkai nomad vessels, their hulls etched with intricate patterns that glowed faintly in the dark, ferried the core components to distant outposts. These ships, silent as shadows, moved through the cracks in the Council's surveillance, their cloaking technology rendering them ghosts in the night. One such ship, the Shroud, docked at an uncharted asteroid base where Elias had arranged a meeting with the Tarkai leader, Akir Ven. The base was a labyrinth of tunnels and chambers carved into the asteroid's rocky heart, its walls glowing faintly with bioluminescent fungi. The air was damp, carrying a metallic tang and the faint vibration of machinery deep below. Akir Ven waited in a circular chamber, illuminated by hovering orbs of light. His tall, wiry frame was cloaked in layered fabrics that shimmered like oil slicks. His orange eyes, bright and unblinking, fixed on Elias as he entered. "Ambassador Drake," Akir said, his voice smooth, almost hypnotic, like the undertow of a dangerous current. "Your request intrigues me." Elias inclined his head, his expression neutral. "It's not just a request, Akir. It's an opportunity, for your people and mine." The Tarkai leader tilted his head, his eyes narrowing slightly. "An alliance against the Council is no small thing. Why should the Tarkai risk extinction for your war?" Elias stepped closer, the cool air brushing his skin. "Because it's not just our war. It's every world the Council has suppressed, every species they've deemed unworthy. We're not asking for loyalty, Akir. We're offering freedom." Akir's lips curved into a faint smile, though his gaze remained sharp. "Freedom is a costly promise." Elias held his gaze, unflinching. "Then let's make sure the Council pays the price." The Tarkai agreed, their stealth expertise becoming a cornerstone of Earth's growing rebellion. They infiltrated Council supply routes, their ships leaving whispers where fleets once stood. Meanwhile, Elias traveled the outer rim, his words igniting sparks of rebellion in oppressed colonies. He spoke not of vengeance, but of vision. A future built on innovation and cooperation, free from the Council's suffocating grip. One night, aboard the Resolute, Elias sat alone in his quarters, the glow of the star fields outside casting faint shadows across the room. His hands rested on a small device projecting a holographic recording, a message from Earth's Prime Minister. Her voice, weary but resolute, filled the space. Elias, the Council has increased its embargo. Civil unrest is rising. We've diverted resources to support your efforts, but our reserves are dwindling. If the relays fail, her voice faltered for a moment, then steadied. We're counting on you, on all of you. Humanity's future depends on this. Elias exhaled, his chest tightening. He leaned back, the cool surface of the chair grounding him as he closed his eyes. The weight of the galaxy pressed against his shoulders, but he refused to bow beneath it. In the quiet, the memory of his father's voice rose unbidden, a voice that had always carried the weight of unshakable belief. Strength isn't about being unyielding, son. It's about knowing when to bend so you don't break. The words grounded him, pulling him back to the present. Elias opened his eyes, his resolve crystallizing into something unbreakable. The Council had underestimated them at every turn, and soon they would realize their mistake. For now, Earth moved like a whisper in the dark, its plans unfolding in silence. But when the time came, their voice would roar. The vast blackness of space stretched infinitely, punctuated only by the glimmer of distant stars and the ominous silhouettes of approaching Council warships. On the bridge of the Resolute, Elias Drake stood at the central command station, his gaze fixed on the holographic display that pulsed with an eerie blue glow. The Council's forward fleet was advancing, their formation precise, their purpose unmistakable, to crush Earth's rebellion before it could take root. Elias's pulse thrummed in his ears, the weight of the moment pressing down like a leaden sky. The smell of ozone lingered in the recycled air of the bridge, mixing with the faint metallic tang of fear. His crew worked with quiet urgency, their voices clipped, their movements deliberate. No one questioned their orders. There was no room for hesitation now. "They've deployed their first wave," reported Lieutenant Nyla Arkin, her fingers flying over her console as streams of data poured across her screens. The soft light illuminated her sharp features, her expression taut with focus. 3 dreadnoughts, supported by a full squadron of escort frigates. They'll be in firing range within 6 minutes. Elias exhaled slowly, steadying himself. "Admiral Voss, your status?" The comm screen flickered, and Voss's face appeared, lined with determination. Behind him, the tactical display of his flagship glowed like a battlefield painted in light. "Our fleets are in position. The Tarkai nomads have confirmed their targets. We'll strike when you give the signal." Elias nodded. "Hold until they're fully committed. Let them think they've won." Voss's lips curled into a grim smile. Always the gambler. The comm cut, and Elias turned his attention back to the display. The Council's fleet moved with predatory elegance, their dreadnoughts exuding a quiet menace that made the air feel heavier. The hum of the ship's engines grew louder, vibrating through the soles of his boots. Time seemed to compress, every second stretching into an eternity as the enemy drew closer. "Captain," Lin Shun's voice crackled through the comms, "the quantum relay network is stable. If this works—" Elias cut her off, his voice firm but laced with reassurance. "It will. Hold the line, Lin." The bridge fell silent as the crew braced for impact. The first barrage came like a thunderclap, shaking the Resolute as plasma rounds exploded against its shields. The smell of overheated circuits mingled with the sharp tang of adrenaline. Sparks flew from a nearby console, and a junior officer scrambled to extinguish them. "Shields holding at 70%, Arkin shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. Elias's jaw tightened. "Deploy the decoys. Let them chase ghosts." From the Resolute's hull, a swarm of small drones shot out, their reflective surfaces distorting light and sensor readings. The Council fleet adjusted course, their formation splintering as they pursued the false signals. Elias watched the display intently, his mind racing with calculations. "Now," he murmured. The command echoed through the fleet, and the counterstrike began. From the shadow of a nearby asteroid belt, Tarkai nomad ships emerged, their sleek black hulls glinting faintly in the starlight. Silent as predators, they moved into position, their weapons targeting the Council frigate's vulnerable flanks. The first explosion lit up the void, a fiery bloom that consumed a frigate in an instant. The soundless violence of the moment was almost surreal, a silent scream against the vast silence of space. One by one, the Tarkai ships struck, their precision honed by years of guerrilla tactics. On the Resolute's bridge, the crew erupted into motion, their voices a symphony of urgency. Arkin called out updates, her tone sharp with exhilaration. 2 frigates down! Their formation is breaking. Elias's hands gripped the edge of the command station as he issued his next orders. Target their dreadnoughts. Focus fire on their command vessel. The Resolute's weapon systems roared to life, energy pulses streaking through the darkness like spears of light. The first dreadnought shuddered under the impact, its shields flaring brightly before collapsing. Secondary explosions rippled across its hull, sending debris tumbling into the void. But the Council fleet was far from defeated. Their remaining ships regrouped, their counterattack swift and devastating. Plasma beams seared through space, cutting through Tarkai ships and leaving trails of destruction in their wake. The Resolute rocked violently as another barrage struck, alarms blaring and warning lights flashing across the bridge. "Shields at 30%, Arkin yelled, her voice strained. Elias's mind raced, weighing options against time. The Council was adapting faster than expected, their tactics shifting with ruthless efficiency. He could almost admire their precision. Almost. But this was no time for admiration. "Voss," he called into the comms, "we need a diversion." "On it," came the Admiral's reply. Moments later, Voss's fleet entered the fray, their arrival marked by a salvo of missiles that lit up the battlefield like fireworks. The Council ships hesitated, their formation splintering as they turned to face the new threat. It was the opening Elias needed. "Fire the pulse disruptor," he commanded. A deep, resonant hum filled the bridge as the Resolute's experimental weapon charged. The disruptor emitted a burst of energy that rippled through the void, its effect invisible but immediate. The Council ships faltered, their systems flickering as the disruptor scrambled their communications and targeting arrays. "Now," Elias barked, "hit them with everything we've got." The Resolute's cannons roared, joined by the Tarkai and Voss's fleets. The Council ships, disoriented and vulnerable, fell one by one, their massive forms consumed by explosions that sent shockwaves rippling through the void. The battle was turning, but victory was not without cost. Tarkai ships lay scattered among the debris, their sleek forms shattered. Voss's flagship limped through the battlefield, its hull scarred and venting atmosphere. The silence on the comms spoke volumes. As the last Council ship retreated, Elias allowed himself a moment of relief. The bridge was quiet now, save for the faint hum of the engines and the crackle of damaged systems. Smoke hung in the air, acrid and sharp, stinging his eyes and throat. The battle was won, but the cost was steep. Elias turned to Arkin, her face pale but resolute. "Damage report." "Severe," she replied, her voice hoarse. "We've lost nearly 20% of our forces. Repairs will take weeks." Elias nodded, his expression grim. "And the Council?" "Retreating," she said. "But they'll be back, and next time they won't underestimate us." Elias stared at the wreckage outside the viewing window, his chest tightening. He could almost feel the weight of the lives lost, the sacrifices made. This was only the beginning. The Council would return, stronger and more determined, and Earth would need to be ready. But as he stood there, a flicker of doubt gnawed at the edges of his resolve. The Council's response had been swift, almost as if they'd anticipated Earth's moves. Had someone leaked their plans? Or was the Council more prepared than they'd let on? Elias's fists clenched at his sides. Questions swirled in his mind, unanswered and unsettling. The stakes were rising and the mystery deepening. The Council was playing a game far more dangerous than he'd imagined, and Earth was walking a razor's edge. He turned to Arkin, his voice steady, despite the turmoil within. Get me Voss and Lynn. We need to regroup. As the crew scrambled to execute his orders, Elias stared into the void, his thoughts racing. The Council's next move would be devastating. But what troubled him most was the gnawing suspicion that the Council wasn't just reacting. They were planning something far worse, something Elias wasn't sure they could stop. The air aboard the Resolute was taut, charged with an energy that felt almost alive. The quiet hum of the engines vibrated through the deck plates beneath Elias Drake's boots as he leaned over the central command table, his fingers tracing the jagged lines of a new battle plan. The holographic map before him pulsed softly, marking Council strongholds and trade routes with sharp crimson lines. But the faint blue orbs representing Earth's allies were growing, slowly, methodically. The room was bathed in the cold light of the hologram, casting long shadows across the weary faces of the command staff gathered around him. Admiral Voss stood at his right, his shoulders a mountain of steady resolve. His uniform bore fresh scorch marks from the last battle, and his voice, when he spoke, carried the rasp of exhaustion. "We can't take another engagement like that," Voss said, his tone low but unyielding. "We won, but at a cost. We've lost a fifth of our forces. The Council is regrouping, and next time they'll bring the full weight of their fleet." Elias's green eyes burned with determination as he straightened. The scent of burnt circuitry lingered in the air, a constant reminder of their narrow victory. His gaze swept across the room, locking briefly on Dr. Lin Xun, whose slim fingers danced over her datapad as she processed the latest intelligence. "What do we know about their movements?" Elias asked, his voice sharp, cutting through the tension like a blade. Lin looked up, her face pale but resolute. "The Council's fleet has repositioned along 3 major trade routes. They're reinforcing their choke points with heavy dreadnoughts and laying down orbital mines to block supply chains. They want to starve us out." "They won't need to starve us," Voss growled. "If they cut off the rim colonies, we'll lose our forward bases. Without them, our fleet will be sitting ducks." Elias exhaled, the weight of their precarious position pressing against his chest. "Then we take the fight to them," he said, his voice steady, each word landing like a hammer on stone. Voss arched a skeptical brow. "You're suggesting a frontal assault?" "No," Elias replied, shaking his head. "I'm suggesting we disrupt their supply chains and force them to spread their forces thin. If we can create enough chaos, they'll lose their ability to coordinate." Lynn hesitated, her voice uncertain. "That's a big gamble. Even with the Tarkai nomads, we're outnumbered." Elias smiled faintly, though there was no humor in it. "It's not about numbers. It's about precision. Lynn, how far along is the quantum prediction algorithm?" Her eyes widened slightly, and she glanced at her datapad. "It's functional," she admitted, "but untested in combat scenarios. The simulations suggest it could predict fleet movements with 85% accuracy based on past behaviors and known variables." "Then we test it now," Elias said. "If it works, we'll know where they'll move before they do. Voss, you'll lead a decoy assault on their primary trade route. Draw them out. Lynn, deploy the algorithm to track their responses. Meanwhile, the Tarkai and I will hit their supply depots in the outer rim." Voss nodded slowly, his expression grim but resolute. "It's risky, but it might just work." The tension in the room shifted as the plan took shape, a fragile hope replacing the undercurrent of despair. The crew dispersed, their voices fading into the steady hum of the ship as they prepared for the next phase of the war. Elias lingered, his gaze fixed on the holographic map. He could feel the weight of the moment settling over him, heavy and suffocating. The Council wasn't just an enemy. They were an immovable force, an ancient empire built on millennia of control. To challenge them felt like trying to shift a mountain with bare hands. And yet, Elias knew they had no choice. To falter now was to surrender everything humanity had fought for. The Shroud, the Tarkai's flagship, glided through the void like a shadow, its hull absorbing the faint starlight. Elias stood on its bridge, the cool air brushing against his skin, carrying the faint scent of oil and alien metals. Akir Ven, the Tarkai leader, moved with feline grace, his orange eyes flickering with quiet intensity. Our scouts have confirmed the location of the supply depot, Akir said, his voice a low murmur that seemed to ripple through the air. It's heavily fortified. Shields, orbital cannons, fighter squadrons. If we attack head-on, we'll be destroyed before we breach the perimeter. Elias crossed his arms, his mind racing. The Tarkai's sleek ships were unmatched in stealth, but even they couldn't bypass such defenses. They needed a way inside, a crack in the armor. What about the supply lines? Elias asked. If we disrupt their incoming shipments, they'll be forced to lower their defenses to resupply. Akir's lips curved into a faint smile. A clever tactic, but it will take time. Time we don't have, Elias replied, his tone sharp. He turned to the tactical display, studying the depot's layout. His eyes narrowed as he spotted a weakness, a faint energy signature on the far side of the station, near a docking bay. That's it, he said, pointing. We infiltrate the docking bay, a small team. We plant charges on their shield generators and disable the defenses from within. Akir's gaze lingered on him, assessing. A bold plan, and dangerous. Dangerous is all we have left, Elias said, his voice resolute. Are your people ready? The Tarkai leader inclined his head. Always. The infiltration team moved with surgical precision, their exosuits blending seamlessly into the shadows. The docking bay was eerily quiet, the hum of the station's power systems the only sound. The air smelled faintly of coolant and machine oil, a sharp tang that clung to the back of Elias's throat. They reached the shield generator without incident, the faint blue glow of its energy field illuminating the darkened chamber. Lynn's voice crackled through Elias's communication. You've got 5 minutes before they detect the breach. Understood, Elias replied, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. The charges were set, their blinking red lights a silent promise of destruction. As the team retreated, the first explosion shook the station, a deafening roar that reverberated through the corridors. Alarms blared, their shrill cries slicing through the chaos as the station's defenses flickered and died. The Shroud and its fleet descended like wolves, their weapons tearing through the depot's now vulnerable hull. Explosions lit up the void, each one a fiery bloom against the darkness. The Council's fighters scrambled to respond, but the Tarkai's precision was unmatched. Within minutes, the depot was reduced to a smoldering ruin. On the bridge of the Shroud, Elias watched the carnage unfold, his heart pounding. The scent of burnt ozone and scorched metal lingered in the air, a bitter reminder of the cost of victory. Lynn's voice crackled through the comms. The algorithm worked. The Council's fleet is en route to Voss's position, just as predicted. Elias exhaled, a flicker of relief breaking through his exhaustion. Then it's time to regroup. We've bought ourselves a reprieve, but they'll adapt. And when they do, we'll need to be ready. As the fleet slipped back into the shadows, Elias couldn't shake the sense of foreboding that lingered like a storm on the horizon. The Council was vast, powerful, and relentless. And though this victory had shifted the tides, Elias knew the hardest battles were yet to come. Somewhere in the depths of Council space, he could feel their plans tightening like a noose, their next move already in motion. He clenched his fists, the weight of the war pressing against him like a mountain. But in the darkness, he saw the faint glimmer of hope, a spark that refused to be extinguished. The fleet hung in the dark void of space, silent and waiting. From the bridge of the Resolute, Elias Drake stared into the abyss, his mind running through the plan for the 100th time. Around him, the hum of the ship's systems filled the silence, a steady rhythm beneath the tension that clung to the air like a storm about to break. The holographic map before him glowed faintly, the Council's massive fleet represented by a shifting red tide that bled toward the fragile blue line of Earth's defenses. They were outnumbered, outgunned, but not outmaneuvered. Not yet. Lin Shun's voice crackled over the comms, her tone calm but laced with urgency. Elias, the algorithm predicts they'll breach our forward line within 20 minutes. We'll need to trigger the countermeasure precisely, or it won't work. Elias nodded, though she couldn't see him. It'll work, he said, his voice steady. They think they're tightening the noose. Let's show them who's really holding the rope. Behind him, Admiral Voss entered, his boots striking the deck with a deliberate cadence. The old soldier looked like he'd aged a decade since the last battle, his face a map of exhaustion and determination. He stepped up to Elias, his voice low and firm. "The men are ready. Whatever happens today, they'll follow you to hell." Elias glanced at him, a faint smile playing at the corner of his lips. "Good, because we might be headed there." The Council's fleet emerged on the edge of the battlefield, a wall of gleaming ships bristling with weapons. Their dreadnoughts moved like predators, each one a fortress of firepower. The sight of them sent a chill down Elias's spine, but he pushed it aside. This was the moment they had planned for, the culmination of every sacrifice and every risk. "Patch me through to the fleet," Elias ordered, his voice cutting through the tense air like steel. The comms officer nodded, and moments later, the channel opened. The faces of captains, commanders, and Tarkai allies appeared on the display, their expressions a mix of resolve and fear. Elias stepped forward, his gaze sweeping over them as he spoke. "This is it," he said, his voice carrying the weight of every life that had brought them to this point. "The Council thinks we're broken, that we're desperate, but they've underestimated us at every turn. They see only numbers. They don't see the fire that burns in us, the fire that refuses to bow, refuses to break." He paused, letting the silence stretch, his words settling over the fleet like an unspoken oath. "Today we show them what it means to be free, not just for Earth, but for every world they've held under their thumb. This isn't just a battle. It's the start of something new. An empire born not of domination, but of unity, of hope." The comms fell silent for a moment, then erupted in a chorus of affirmations. The sound was like a spark catching dry tinder, igniting a blaze of purpose across the fleet. Elias turned back to the holographic map, his jaw tightening as he gave the final order. "All ships, engage." The void exploded into chaos. The Council's fleet surged forward, their weapons spewing streams of plasma and energy that lit up the darkness. Earth's forces met them head-on, their smaller, nimbler ships weaving between the Council's behemoths like swarming wasps. Tarkai vessels darted through the fray, their cloaking systems flickering as they launched precise strikes against vulnerable targets. On the Resolute's bridge, the air was alive with the tension of battle. The acrid scent of overheated circuits filled Elias's nostrils as the ship shuddered under a direct hit. Sparks flew from a nearby console, and the comms officer cursed under his breath. "Shields at 50%, Arkin shouted, her voice sharp with urgency. "Hold the line," Elias commanded, his voice unyielding. "Keep the pressure on their flanks. Lynn, are we ready?" Lynn's voice crackled over the comms. "Almost. The disruptor array is charging, but we need another 5 minutes." "Voss," Elias called, turning to the old admiral. "Buy us those 5 minutes." Voss nodded, his face grim. "Understood." The admiral's fleet surged forward, drawing the Council's attention with a ferocious assault. The Council's dreadnoughts turned their massive guns on Voss's ships, their plasma beams carving through hulls and scattering debris into the void. But Voss held firm, his voice steady over the comms as he rallied his captains. "Focus fire on their command ship," he barked. "Make them bleed." Elias watched, his chest tightening as Voss's flagship absorbed hit after hit. Flames licked at its hull, and escape pods launched in desperate bursts of light. Yet the old admiral didn't flinch. His sacrifice gave Lynn the time she needed. "The disruptor is ready," Lynn announced. "Triggering now." The Resolute's experimental array pulsed, releasing a wave of energy that rippled across the battlefield. The effect was immediate. The Council's ships faltered, their systems flickering as the disruptor scrambled their targeting and communications. In the chaos, Earth's fleet struck with renewed vigor, tearing through the disoriented enemy like a storm. Elias's voice rang out over the comms. "Push forward! Take their flagship!" The Resolute surged into the heart of the battle, its weapons blazing. Elias stood firm at the command station, his heart pounding as the Council's flagship loomed ahead. Its massive guns turned on the Resolute, and for a moment time seemed to slow. Then from the shadows, the Tarkai fleet appeared, their stealth ships striking with surgical precision. The Council's flagship shuddered, its hull splitting open as explosions rippled through its core. The dreadnought listed to one side, its lights flickering before it detonated in a blinding flash. The battlefield fell silent. The Council's remaining ships began to retreat, their once formidable formation shattered. Cheers erupted across Earth's fleet, a wave of relief and triumph washing over them. Elias exhaled, his shoulders sagging as the weight of the moment hit him. The bridge was quiet now, save for the hum of the engines and the faint crackle of damaged systems. He turned to Voss's comm, only to see static. The old admiral's flagship had fallen, taking its captain with it. Elias's jaw tightened, grief twisting in his chest. But there was no time to mourn. The battle was won, but the war was far from over. Lynn's voice broke the silence. The Council is calling for a ceasefire. They're offering terms. Elias nodded slowly, his gaze fixed on the fading glow of the Council's retreating fleet. They finally understand, he said, his voice quiet but firm. We're not just another colony to crush. We're an empire. Later, as the fleet regrouped and the first sparks of rebuilding began, Elias stood on the Resolute's observation deck. The void stretched out before him, vast and unbroken. The Council had sought to banish Earth, to confine it to the edges of the galaxy. Instead, they had forged something greater, an empire built not on fear, but on hope, on unity, on the unyielding resolve of a species that refused to bow. Elias's voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of every life that had brought them to this moment. They tried to cage us. Instead, we've shown them what it means to be free. And as the stars burned brightly in the endless void, he knew their story was only beginning.